Start, everyone. It's in your folder, the most recent copy of S-167. Okay, welcome everyone to Senate Education, Tuesday, March 12th, 1:28 p.m. We have a week. This is crossover week, and we are going to today vote out hopefully the literacy bill. And then later this week, we will vote out our miscellaneous education bill. I'm just looking because it's behind you. S-120, post-secondary school sexual misconduct, CTEs 304, and technology in schools S-285. So those are the 4 items that are still will be in play after today. And Secretary Boucher is here to talk to us about S-167, and we've asked Secretary Boucher, she's kindly agreed, at least she remembers, to be available this week as much as possible as we sort of pull things together and wrap things up. So, yeah, thanks for coming in today. We are looking, as I mentioned, 3.1 of S-167. And just to take the committee through it, what is in it so far that we've had a lot of time on: public instruction bids, revising the post-secondary schools chartered in Vermont. This is an elimination of some institutions that are out of statute that are no longer active, and alters the name of the Vermont Law School. Awarding of funds for which I think the secretary talked to us a little bit about, food programs, Holocaust education data collection, virtual learning, which was at the request of the Agency of Education. And I know people are getting a lot of calls and emails about the home study program, that we returned some language on this issue and to this issue that we removed last year. And just to, again, set the table a little bit for those that are watching, last year, Secretary French came in and asked us to revise, streamline, get rid of redundancies in the homeschool program. And there was some testimony felt it made sense, and we did so. And now what we're trying to make sure we are doing is we're not throwing out the possibility or the need that we sort of have a check-in, that we go ahead and make sure that families and kids are getting the education they need. So that was our thought on that. But if you want, start at the top, or whatever you'd like to do, however you'd like to handle it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Heather Boucher, the Interim Secretary of Education. So we're going to do this in a bit of a tag team. So I'm going to be joined in a moment by Ann Bordenaro, Dr. Ann Bordenaro, who is our Interim Deputy Secretary.
Don't know if we've met yet. How nice.
Perhaps not, which is interesting because she certainly spends a lot of time, usually on Zoom.
Well, then we probably
with committee members. So I'm going to cover our comments, thoughts, just general ideas around section 5, which is the Holocaust education component. Anne is going to talk about, I believe, Mr. Chair, you had a couple of questions left from committee members, perhaps on the school foods.
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes yesterday, had a couple of questions.
Yes. And Anne can cover those, and
Beautiful.
then Anne can also cover home study.
Beautiful.
Because those are under her division in the agency. So I'm looking in particular at section 5, as I said, the Holocaust education data collection and report section. Just some certain key messages I want to make sure that I say on the record, that certainly we understand and appreciate the committee's commitment to understanding the scope of teaching the Holocaust in Vermont. I think we all have a shared goal of ensuring that all of our students understand this pretty horrific period in history, and the implications of that even extending to today. Thank you for jumping in.
Yeah, no, of course.
Searching for the proper
ethos
to convey. So, and again, as I just alluded to, we know that sadly, lessons on the Holocaust are pertinent today. And we want to help support all students to develop the skills that are required to understand the past in order that they become well-rounded, responsible, informed, civically engaged citizens in the future. However, so we agree with all that, but one of the things that we wanted to convey is that the task laid out in the current draft is a much larger lift than it appears to be on paper. And so I just wanted to clarify that with the committee. So firstly, the timeline we believe would be extremely difficult to achieve. So if nothing else, if we could suggest a longer timeline for getting this information back, that would be helpful for us.
Yes, and so senators, is that okay? I mean, really, we're asking September 1, which frankly, possible, the governor signs this in July, so, what would you like, given that we really want a robust, thoughtful?
Yeah, let's see. So if we could add on, maybe,
I think you could get it to us by, sometime in the spring.
if we could do it by, could we say March 1st?
Yeah.
So bump that full piece and then
Yes.
just have the report done maybe at the end of spring, because or can I just confirm, then we'll come back like today and get you some update, because I know that there are contingencies on all three of these dates.
Yeah.
Part of what I'm kind of thinking about in my brain is that, which is where we all think, is that there's a component for the agency. And I think we need a little bit of time, but not a lot for that part. But it's really the part about the field and how long it would take them to get all this information. And so I'm not sure, like, I can speak to that, or even, I mean, that's a good question for the bees. Like, how long would you need? And really, it's because this bill is asking for a curriculum audit, like to the classroom level for this information. And one of the challenges that I think will occur is it's not Holocaust materials and studies and conversations don't just happen in sort of where we might think. So in social studies or in the humanities,
Mhm.
they actually happen across a broad variety of different courses and topics. And so if we really want it to be a very robust canvas of what's going on, that's going to take some time. So really, that's in a nutshell, what our biggest concern is.
Yeah, just to ensure I understand, so there's like 3 steps. First step is we request of ASUs to report, just requesting.
But that will take some time, because we need to clarify what that request looks like, and, yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that was it. I just want to make sure.
So some of the features that I'm talking about like, okay, make sure you're thinking about all of these different ways that it could be in your curriculum, will be something that we need to reflect on and probably reach out to the field and get some feedback on. So that's gonna take a couple months, and that's why we're saying. If we just do it and we just send out a blanket statement that says, hey, give us this information, what's gonna come back is not gonna be useful
Sure.
information. It will be garbage in, garbage out. And so that's what we're trying to do. We wanna do this right if we're gonna do it.
And Madam Secretary, you have, so on or so that first date, you would like March 1, 2025. Is that
I
accurate?
think if we could scooch that to like December 1.
Yes, that's. feels
I
better to
think
me.
that's,
Great,
I think that's very reasonable on our end.
great.
But it's the
24, great.
second date.
Yeah.
That
And then if
we could offer something, but I also would really think that it would be good to hear from, I know you're trying to get this out this week, but it would be good to hear from the Bs about, like, you know, the curriculum coordinators in particular, like, what do they think this lift would be for them?
My gut is they could do it in 3 months.
Maybe.
I don't think so.
Well, there's a lot going on in our schools right now, so.
I mean, I have if it's gonna produce a better report, I have no problem with more time.
I mean, I think in that case, if we could have.
We don't wanna do this again.
No, so if we could actually deploy it by, meaning the survey request goes out.
Yeah.
We deploy that by, what did we say, December?
Yes.
And then they have the whole spring, and even if they need the summer to like clean up that, like, if they could have it due to us September 1st of 2025.
Okay.
I think that would be very
Fine.
reasonable, and I think that would give all parties enough time to really do a fine job on it.
And then that would give a report, it would give us in January 1, 2026.
Yeah,
Okay.
if that would be amenable to the,
Does that sound okay to everybody? It was like
plenty of time to get really great.
really great. Yeah.
Then the other thing, I would say is that there are some significant and great resources, that the agency and partners have been developing, and so we just really wanted to put a plug for that again as well.
On this topic.
On this topic, great, yeah, because really where the action is gonna be is on that professional learning for teachers to make sure that, because we really haven't answered, and that will be the report, so what next, once these data are here, and that will give all of us, I think, some good information about. It is actually being taught in a robust way, or very likely it's going to be variable across districts.
Yeah, and frankly, I think this will be a good exercise for us all to sort of see how this kind of curriculum audit happens.
Yeah. The only last point of caution I would make, which I am compelled as the interim secretary to say, is that this will be in some way setting a precedent, because the state has really left the curriculum and what's in the curriculum alone in our state. So I just want to put that on the record, that this is new. And another, to go a step further, there may be lots of requests like this that come to the education committees afterwards.
Yeah, and I think people will tell me if they disagree. I feel like this is a compromise, given the rise of anti-Semitism, the numbers that we were presented around the lack of knowledge of Holocaust education. Recognizing that Act 1 is talking about genocide in general, really important. But this strikes us as warranting this kind of conversation, and I think future legislatures will also weigh pros and cons.
If this were to become a more standard operating procedure, we would need a lot more resources.
Sure.
That's what I'm. Because it would substantially change the scope and the.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Put it on
That's fair.
Okay, and would you like to comment? I think, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
So yeah, before you go, since you mentioned that Ann is discussing which parts, the food grants and homeschooling.
Yep.
Let's just take a quick look, virtual learning.
I believe that is similar to, I think it's exactly the same. So anything that we're not discussing, we have no problem with.
You have no problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is gonna be voted out, so.
Will we have time to talk about virtual learning?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if there's somebody in particular you'd like to hear from, I mean, we've had some time on it with Beth. And I think I could be wrong, some of the V's. So feel free to put a name or whatever you'd like.
I just generally have concerns about it, but I can.
Okay,
say that
yeah.
For our.
Yeah,
committee
no,
discussion.
definitely. Let's do it.
So we're not gonna talk about, we're just gonna ask the LEAs to report back about what if they're teaching it or not. We're not identifying any standard that needs to be met for this training.
But I want to go back to Senator Hashim, if I may. Senator Hashim, tell me a little bit, if you don't mind, let's have a little conversation about virtual learning and how.
Yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, I guess I'm thinking generally about the social aspects of being in school. I'm also thinking back to when I was 13 and 14, and I would love nothing more than to not physically go to school and learn from home. And I do acknowledge there's definitely ways this can be useful, like if you're, say you get a sports injury or you're in a car crash and you can't, it's hard to physically go to school, but I don't generally agree, with having this be a sort of broad thing where, any student well, I guess the policy would still have to get made, but, or the standards, but it seems very generalized, for a student to, uh, through the kind of self-paced environment or real-time environment that's described in the section. I worry about the idea of turning education into this thing where you're just seated in front of a computer in your house and you're missing out on the interactions that you have with other kids and adults in a place that's not your home.
Yeah.
So,
So if I may, just remind us the problem that this is trying to solve.
So the problem this is trying to solve is that right now that's already happening. So right now there are students who are actually taking online courses, largely through VTBLC. And to answer some of your questions, I would strongly recommend that the board, that the committee hear from VTBLC, because a lot of the concerns that you have around social interactions are really addressed by a very high quality online learning environment. So it isn't actually that students are just by themselves sitting on a computer. They have a lot of VTBLC has a lot of group time spent in together. It has a lot of external activities that they do as a group outside of the online learning. So I think it would be important to learn a little bit more about that. So the problem is we have incredible inequity right now. So what we're asking is that we actually clean up our statute so it reflects what we want to see equitably for all students. So right now, it's left up to LEAs whether students can actually participate in virtual learning or not. And we don't think that that's fair. We think that if all parties who make up students' personalized learning plans agree that virtual learning would be a good opportunity for that student. For instance, you had some great examples when students are injured, but we also know from COVID that there are many students who super excel in online learning. Part of it is because it was just a better paradigm for them to learn. They're better at learning online visually, not being in that social atmosphere of just auditory information. So we want to really just expand the playing field in that way, that more students who want this as a pathway can have access to it, because it's inequitable the way it is currently. So this would really just clean up and make certain that this is a potential flexible pathway for all students.
So if I may, then going back to Senator Hashim's question. You said right now some of this is happening, but are we saying something where away from the LEAs to make decisions?
No, because it would still have to be part of the personalized learning plan.
Okay.
What's happening now is there's some real lack of clarity around how ADM fits in, and so this would actually fix that. Because if a student is participating in online learning, they still would get, the LEA would still have average daily membership counting towards that, and so that's been a barrier. And quite honestly, a true source of confusion for LEAs. It's not their fault. So sometimes some will say, well, we don't know. So the answer is no, we can't do it because we don't know how that's actually going to affect our funding. Or some will say, sure, go do it and we'll figure it out. And we think that we can do better as a state. Like we can actually have the structure in place so that LEAs know exactly, okay, our ADM would not be affected. And if we again all agree, it's just part of the personalized learning plan process, which involves teachers, school leadership, parents, and the student, that this is a really good viable solution for this student. And again, it doesn't have to be a full-time program. It can be mix and match, or it can be full-time.
But right now, do we have kids that are maybe flying under the radar, somebody's radar, that are at home, taking 5 classes online? They would still need permission from their LEA.
They're not flying under the radar,
Okay.
because their LEA knows they're doing that.
Yeah.
But for instance, we have that happening in, I'm making this up, Addison County. In one of the middle schools or high schools in Addison County, they're perfectly fine to take those 5 classes. But I'm making this up, these are not the right regions. But let's just say over in Springfield,
Yeah,
the students are not able to take those classes because the interpretation has been different and the agency doesn't really have the statutory regulatory authority because of the way it's written right now, just to make a call. So really, that's what we're asking for.
Is the concept that, all grades, all subjects would be like accessible from a AOE sponsored, curriculum?
It wouldn't be AOE sponsored, the way we've written the language would require the AOE to actually do a contract with an entity.
Okay.
So it's sponsored in that way, but it's really state sponsored. Currently, that entity is VTBLC, as I've said, we have funded them for a long time. There's no reason to think that it wouldn't be VTBLC in the future, but we've purposefully left the language a little broader in case, who knows, they ever went out of business or something, we need another option. Right now, it's really framed around that personalized learning plan and those start in 7th grade. But I do think it's a good question for us to kind of look at how this goes with an increase, potentially, or not. It's really just offering the option for students. And then if it does seem that there's a clamor for younger students, we can visit that then. I will say, I start to have concerns when we're talking about younger kids. I mean, like, they really need that. I think in-person circle time, like on the rug and that kind of stuff. So it's harder for me to envision what a full remote system would look like for younger kids up to, 4th, 5th grade versus when they get into middle school and certainly high school. It really works well for some students and it doesn't work for others. And so there's nothing about this that's a
Yeah,
mandate.
no, I can see where it would definitely work for some and not work for others. I share Senator Hashim's concern about the social aspects of it. Senator Hashim, that's-
Just one follow-up point, I mean, to the point raised about younger kids. Do you have thoughts on putting in some sort of guardrail that this is applicable to, let's say, grades 9 and above?
I wouldn't say 9 because we framed it around the personalized learning plans and that starts at 7. So I think we already have that in there that we're framing it around. It needs to be part of the discussion happening around kids' personalized learning plans. And it should be it should be a thought out process. It shouldn't just be off you go, no one's really paying attention and go off there and do that online work. It really should be a thoughtful, planful kind of conversation that occurs.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this presentation. So we don't have a chapter in here yet that deals with virtual learning. Is that correct? Looks like we're creating one, 948. Is that right?
I think that there's a bit of language in there, but I think the section that we provided might have been a little more extensive. And I'm looking at Lindsay because we did testify in that in House Ed, so we can get that language to you if you like. It was actually a separate standalone bill presented by, I think, Rep. Toof over there, but,
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to see that. And my son couldn't get a physics class at his high school, so he took physics through VTBLC and it was really good and it was really nice to have that option. I want to echo that what my colleague is saying, that for me, school is, yes, partially about academics, but it's also a major part of it is having other trusted adults in a kid's life, including teenagers, as well as just the socialization piece. And, again, sitting in health and welfare, as 3 of us do, we are constantly talking about adolescent mental health and isolation and all of these things. And the isolation piece, I think, is really what scares me the most of this virtual learning environment. So, I think maybe as we move forward in time, this will evolve and change, but I would like to see a little bit more structure and guardrails around it. I'm also a little concerned about, a bad actor or somebody who else is going to be coming into this space. Now, we have VTBLC and they're fantastic, but who's going to be regulating other companies or platforms, or will that be the AOE?
we are only, this law only has us contracting with one entity. Okay. So it's not contemplated that we would contract with others. Okay.
I'm sorry, Senator.
Can I just actually address a little bit of what you were saying though, Senator Hewlett? So, I I'm both personally as a parent and then also professionally aware, certainly, of the challenges that occur as a result of mental health, particularly anxiety, those kinds of anxiety, depression, those kinds of things that really have until I think COVID been very silent robbers of our kids' educational experiences. And I actually see the promise of this option much more than I see the downside, because I think that there are kids who we've started to see something in the last couple decades that I think a lot of our educators might still struggle with, which is it's school refusal. So it's not truancy. It's actually kids who desperately know that they're supposed to be at school. They desperately want to be doing the right thing. But their anxiety or their depression is so profound that they literally can't get out of the house. And so I think if we don't think about these other types of accommodations that we could give these students, we're doing them a disservice, because I have seen that the option historically in the traditional schooling sense is like the option is get your butt to school. We're gonna send a truancy officer out, even if your parents are working with us, even if we know that it's not the traditional truant who's out there goofing off, running the streets. And I don't think that's the approach that's helpful. So to me, this is, that's part of the problem that we're also trying to address, which is to provide more options that really meet students where they are. And again, I mean, I can only speak so much about what the model actually looks like, but I think it would be really helpful to hear from VTBLC about the notion that it is a student that's really just sitting alone in their room. There are certainly aspects of that, but there's also aspects of that for regular school too, when they study.
Right.
There's a lot of, it depends on whether it's an asynchronous or synchronous class.
Yeah.
So some of them, if they're synchronous, they have to be there in the class with the others. So, and I think these are really good questions, so I hope I'm not coming across as way too defensive. But I have seen it work really well through COVID.
Me too.
And I would like that to be an option more for students that it really works well. I will share, you know, my daughter's gonna kill me, but I happen to be the mom of a daughter who would not have graduated from high school without online options. She is brilliant, but just didn't want to deal with the cliques, didn't want to deal with a lot of the social stuff at school. That was nothing that the school did. It's just who she is. She was like, nope, I just want to move on this at my own pace, and here we go. And there was a time when, you know, her dad and I really thought like this kid is gonna like drop out of school. We kind of somehow figured this out for her. So that's just a personal anecdote. That's not why I'm pushing this flexibility so much, but I do feel that I have seen it and I've heard it from other folks.
And I could be wrong. Yesterday I toured a school, truancy rates, it seemed like truancy rates were really high.
They are.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, but if this kind of thing could help, sure.
I love having the flexibility. I will love to see some long range studies on whether further isolation for kids with anxiety is helpful or detrimental. I have no idea. I'm not a
Yeah.
mental health professional, but I'll look forward to that data in the future, because I'm sure this is gonna become more and more of a thing, so.
It's
And
not
I
good.
just made, yeah.
It's not
yeah.
good for kids with anxiety. I mean, I think ideally this would be coupled with strong supports and those kinds of things. So, yeah, sorry, Mr. Cherry.
No, I listen, sometimes maybe I'm wrong, being in that school, bumping up with other kids socially and emotionally also, you know, for some kids, it kind of helps us, speaking for myself, grow. But for others, I get it. It's too much. It's absolutely too much. Yeah, Senator Weeks and Senator Weeks.
Oh, just a quick question on, so the current language is shall maintain. My understanding is you've got a current contract.
Mhm.
Is there a,
And a state appropriation.
Okay.
Yep.
oh, good. So I assume that, there's funds involved. Is this statement kind of a method to say we need more, or we need a stronger AOE staff in this particular, to support this program, or additional funding? Because population would increase that's benefiting for the program?
At this point, no, so it doesn't have a fiscal note with it. Again, it's more of a technical correction in our mind to kind of fix some of the stuff, to really clarify what the intent of the legislature is, that this be an optional viable pathway for students. We don't need any more funding at this point. We have built it into our operating budget, both in terms of a direct appropriation to VTVLC and other grants that we actually routinely put out. It's possible that in a future time, that would need to be increased. If you're not familiar, the cool thing about VTVLC too is that it's all licensed educators, because they actually have a sharing philosophy around that. So at this time, we're not contemplating that we would have to go outside of the state for this model.
And then to use Senator Gillick's example, can any kid around the state access physics, whatever advanced physics or physics course remotely?
They could with this, they
This-
can't right now.
Cannot right
So
now.
it's really gotta be like up to the school. If the school will support it. And this would ensure that there's more access.
And the licensing, the licensing is all set where, typically my experience is that a company providing access to a program like this would either charge by the seat or charge by, like a group count.
I think it's a combination now, so the old model for VTVLC used to be solely like an in-kind. So if you as a school provide us with 2 teachers who will be trained to be VTVLC online teachers, we will allow you to have so many seats for your students. But what we've done in the meantime, and it started in COVID and continuing, is we actually gave VTVLC more direct state dollars so that they can do that still. Plus, they actually can hire their own. They're still using licensed teachers, though. That's not something that they would want to back off from, because that's their selling point. I want to say I'm a little concerned if you want to hear other stuff, because I think are we at 2:30 supposed to be, we're supposed to be outside at 2:30, so I apologize.
House, they can wait. Great, anything else? So,
Anne was gonna hop up and talk about some of the questions.
no, yes, I know,
Okay.
but anything else for the secretary? Okay, great,
Thank you.
terrific,
Yep.
thank you so much. Let's see.
When I walked in, I said, the room is smaller in person than it appears on the video.
Oh.
It's like, where are we?
Nice to see you. It's Fornero?
Yeah.
And Ms. or
Ms. Doctor.
Doctor? Okay.
Yeah.
We just asked. Yeah,
Sure.
that's great. Dr. Fornero. And you're the interim deputy secretary. Thanks so much for joining us. And you're going to comment on 2 sections. The first one, if senators would direct your attention to page 4. I believe. Yes, this is.
What's that chat?
This is on grants
School
for
nutrition
food.
grants,
School
yeah.
nutrition grants. Yeah, please.
So this suggestion to change the eligibility for those grants to include the child and adult care food program, which is the component of our school nutrition programs that operates through childcare centers.
Yeah.
It comes about because a number of things have happened kind of at the same time that have impacted these centers as well as these grants. So first of all, there's a number of grants available now for equipment, materials, and all the rest for school nutrition programs.
So I'm gonna interrupt and I apologize. Just back up and tell us who we're trying to help. Well, I'm just trying to focus this a little bit,
Sure.
because it was a little confusing to me yesterday when I was reading it again for
Sure.
the 3rd or 4th time.
We're trying to make sure 2 things. One, that we maximize use of this state funding, that we completely, take full advantage of it. And number 2, that we benefit a group of providers of school meals that breakfast and lunch, and sometimes after care, whatever meals, that currently cannot access these grants.
Okay,
So
so does this have anything to do with universal school meals?
only very indirectly. So there's more money flowing to schools, K to 12 schools now than there used to be, and that includes specifically more child nutrition money flowing to them. So there are these grants, there are federal equipment grants, there is universal meals, there's more funding flowing to them for all kinds of parts of their meal programs. So because of that and grant fatigue, they are taking up these grants in a smaller degree than they used to. These are primarily for equipment. So buying like a new oven to cook, whatever. So for the last couple of cycles, we've had to run the competition several times in order to maximize the use of the funds. Meanwhile, there's a whole category of programs serving children from like 6 years old and down, and including some after-school settings, who cannot access any of these other sources of fundings. And during COVID, those programs were particularly impacted. People pulled their kids from childcare programs, childcare programs had to close, they lost staff. The staff haven't returned, the kids haven't returned, and the federal funding for childcare programs is dependent on the number of meals served. So there's this big retrenchment going on, and we're slowly building our way back to where we were before in the child and adult care food program. But this would significantly help those people who provide meals through these programs. Many of them are, centers, home-based daycares, pretty much everybody except schools who provides meals in childcare settings. If they could also access these grants to buy a new oven, a new refrigerator.
So it's
whatever.
all equipped.
It's pretty much all equipment. I think it says equipment and supplies or something like that, but it's basically equipment. People buy equipment, and it's small purchases in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, Senator Hashim and Senator Weeks.
Thank you. So I'm sorry if you already mentioned this. I just want to make sure I understand. So schools don't apply for these grants, but supervisory unions do apply for these grants.
Not quite.
Okay.
The school food authorities, which are generally one per supervisory union, but independent schools are also, some of them operate National School Lunch Program and therefore have a school food authority. It's a designation that USDA requires. That's the operating entity for all child nutrition programs. So in schools, so school food authorities apply for these grants. They are usually the same as SUs. Every one of our 52 whatever SUs has a school food authority, but there are other school food authorities in Catholic schools, in Burn, whatever.
But who's the school, sorry, go ahead.
And so if this is added, would that take away from the pot, we'll call it, that's SUs or that school food authorities would be able to access for their programs? And yeah, would it diminish the amount that's in there?
It's a set pot, so it is entirely possible that it will diminish the amount that's available to those school food authorities. The reality is that they have not maximized the use of that pot in recent years. And as I said, we've had to run multiple grant rounds to try to get them to apply for and use these funds. And part of that is because they're having access to they have access to a lot of other sources of funds for essentially the same purposes. And also there's sort of a grant fatigue in general. And in some places, is it worth the effort, to put in an application for $2,000? So if we were at 100% use of the pot of funds with the SFAs, we wouldn't be making this request, but we're not at that place. And so by opening it up to these other entities, we're giving them an opportunity to access a source of funds to support their meals programs, which are really important and have so many fewer other opportunities to have financial support for those programs. And we're taking up the excess that is currently going unused.
And last question, are you able to give me a ballpark of how much is left on the table for unused?
I could get that information for you. I could ask the person who administers this program in my division for the numbers for the last couple of years, for example.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, and just so you know, it's supposed to be one round of applications, one set of grants, but as I said, he's intentionally run a second round several times now to try to get more uptake. So the final number is after 2 rounds in some cases, so, but I will definitely have that for you.
I'm not convinced this belongs here. I'll have to give it some more thought. It almost seems like a health and welfare thing in some regards, and I might yank it and send it, or we might have to have more testimony, but you're opening up a lot of different conversations at this point that I don't think we're ready to decide on. Please, Senator Weeks.
Oh, just curiosity, if you're anticipating based on the Universal School Meals program, a larger interest in equipment and such, being that this is only, Universal School Meals is less than a year old. Aren't they going to be like building capability or anticipating to be building capability that would absorb the excess that might be in this grant program?
Potentially, I mean, they've been doing essentially universal school meals for several years now. So although we haven't had a state universal meals program, they have been serving any child who wanted a meal for, since 2020.
Good.
So they have been buying equipment. There are, as I said, there are other ways that they can buy equipment. They are not limited to buying equipment with this particular grant. So yes, they have been buying equipment, expanding their kitchen operations, some of it was material to package meals so that, kids can eat in the classroom or take it to go, and a whole bunch of different things.
Okay, then second question is, in paragraph B, it very specifically says for nonprofit organizations to utilize these funds, but not commercial sites, not a commercial, daycare center wanting to build a food program.
You'd have to qualify for the child and adult care food program first. You'd have to be a provider of meals through that program before you could apply for a grant to support your meals program. So not every child care provider, I won't say the numbers without knowing for sure, I could ask, but I don't believe that the majority of the people providing childcare in this state at the moment are operating this. It's called CICFP, Child and Adult Care Food Program. It's a complex program to run. It's really challenging for a lot of small providers. And so, as I said, we lost a lot of those providers when kids were pulled back home and all, financial viability was strained, and we are clawing our way back to the numbers we had before through a lot of outreach and trying to get folks to rejoin the program.
But a nonprofit organization doesn't have those same hurdles.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, you kind of, so I asked about commercial providers. And you said they have to apply for the food center.
There are requirements regarding who can be a child and adult care food program provider. It's a federal requirement.
Okay, so it doesn't make a difference if they're nonprofit or.
I
I'm just
think,
wondering why it's so specific nonprofit.
I believe that if that's there, it's because it's a requirement of the federal program that you have to be a nonprofit. I'm not sure about that. I will ask our child and adult care food program person. But you can't apply for these grants unless you're already a provider of meals within your child care setting through the federal program. You've been approved and are participating in that, just in the same way that you can't apply for the grants as a school unless you're participating in the National School Lunch Program, which at this point, all public schools are because of universal meals, but a lot of independents are not, so they can't apply for these grants if they're not part of NSLP.
I like the idea of this playing out actually, is make sure all the public schools get what they're going to need, frankly. And some of this, the early childhood stuff really is not generally early childhood stuff. It isn't our jurisdiction. There's some overlap with health and welfare. So we may pull this section and send you, if you don't mind dealing with it in the house.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm happy, if I come back in the house, I'm happy to bring our child nutrition director, I'm sure you're familiar with Rosie
This is
Kruger, and our director of the CICFP program, who can talk to you about the specific requirements to be participating in CICFP, for example.
All right, let's shift to homeschool,
Sure.
please.
So you alluded at the beginning of this session to the fact that it was just last year, late in the session, that significant changes were made to the home study rules. And those went into effect in July of 23. So we haven't been a full year with the new rules yet. So, we are hoping to get a full year of implementation before we evaluate how they're working and make any changes. I'd say that's our first kind of overall comment. You know, we're just opening for re-enrollment for next year. We've just opened on March first, so the beginning of applications are trickling in. So we'd like to fundamentally just get a year under our belt with the rules before we make any changes. At the same time, we also specifically oppose revision of the rules to reinstate hearings at this time. There are a couple reasons for that. One of them, a big one, and you mentioned it or you alluded to it earlier when you were talking about school refusal and absenteeism. The AOE is working with Agency of Human Services on how we're jointly addressing the issue of chronic absenteeism, which is a growing problem. And we're considering potentially bringing draft language back to the legislature next year to update Title 16 and 33 around truancy and some of these issues. So we'd like to incorporate discussions of absenteeism, non-participation in school, non-provision of education, all within those broader conversations about how do we deal with absenteeism and including educational neglect, which is typically what it's called with younger children. Home study students are entitled to the same rights to education under the Constitution as public school students, and we are having a broader conversation about balancing students' rights, parents' rights, different things, and so it seems an inappropriate time to introduce another change into the home study rules, particularly when in the absence of discussing it in the context of these broader issues.
So if I may, I mean, the very first part of this bill says, if the secretary has information that creates significant doubt about whether a home study program can or will provide a minimum course of study for a student who is not yet enrolled, the secretary may call a hearing. I mean, to me, that seems like a logical thing.
It seems self-explanatory, and logical. I agree with you. The problem is that if we have credible evidence, so what constitutes credible evidence? If we get a email from a neighbor, for example, or, you know, a relative, you know, I don't think that this child is getting appropriately educated, well educated, receiving education, whatever. What is our standard for deciding they've enrolled in home study, they followed the rules, they attested that they have, you know, that they're complying with all the requirements under statute for a curriculum and an assessment? Are we going to start investigating, I don't know, hearsay? Like, what is our standard going to be, you know, and
When, frankly, I think when we see something in society that causes us to pause, whether it's related to education, abuse, all sorts of things that we may see, somebody, a former police officer, here, I mean, things have got to be looked at to protect society, particularly children in general. And to me, I seems like a perfectly reasonable thing, and I understand that you might need more staff to do it. But when it comes to kids,
well, so we've already talked to our
Senator
principals.
Hashim has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To jump in.
Just more of a comment, I think, Senator Campion, I think. I get what you're saying about the hearings before the enrollment, I think. I don't wanna butcher what the concern was that was raised to me, but. There is a logistical issue with, I think, the 10 days compared to the 45 days. Regarding regarding the evidence that has to be submitted. But I definitely support the hearings after enrollment, bringing those back. But I think there are some logistical issues that might have to be addressed if we wanted to consider the hearings before enrollment.
So you're talking specifically, just help me out a little bit here. This is post enrollment, realizing there's an issue, something pops up.
Post enrollment after the program has started,
Has
whereas
started.
with, you know, with this hearings before the enrollment, the
Yeah.
program hasn't started.
Yeah.
But And so it's, I think the issue is, how do you prove something that
Hasn't
hasn't
started.
happened yet?
Yeah. That's a
So,
good point.
and I think there was another issue, I don't wanna butcher it, but it had something to do with the 10 days compared to 45 days, and I'm not the person to speak on that, I think maybe Retta would be, but, hearings post enrollment. I think those should go back down.
Did,
Go ahead.
before last year's legislation, you had a hearing process?
We did, but we almost never had a hearing, and when we had a few hearings, we weren't very successful in those. And certainly our general counsel can speak to that, going back a number of years. We haven't had a single hearing since I've been here, in this role, which was 2019, and that is because even with the old, more stringent requirements for enrollment, we tended to pursue it with the parent until we got the basic materials we needed, which was, evidence of what their curriculum would be, and then evidence of some learning. It was an extensive, complicated back and forth process, and even in the end, when you get the documents, that doesn't necessarily mean that what's happening at home is at all related to the documents. But we went through a very labor-intensive process to require documents, and a big part of why we made the changes was because that was considered onerous for many families, and it was also considered onerous for the agency in terms of staffing to collect these volumes of paper around what the parents said they were doing and what they had done.
Right, but this is specific to hearings, not
Right.
about the whole program.
We did not have hearings because, and when we had them in the past before that, our ability to prevail in those hearings was very, very weak. Again, because there wasn't a clear standard, and a hearing officer would say, it's the parent's right to educate their child in the way that they want. There's some minimum evidence of something going on here. I think it's important to separate neglect in the sense of physical abuse, physical neglect, emotional harm, those kinds of pieces, which we absolutely would report any report of that, we would refer, and we would encourage the folks who are contacting us to refer. There's a definite process for that through GCF, Family Services Division. What we're talking about here is we get an email that I don't think that my ex neighbor, my daughter, my, former spouse, whatever, is educating our children appropriately. What does that look like? What does that mean? And if you go to a hearing, how are we going to know that? Are we going to send someone from our agency out to that parent's home? Which is complicated to have the authority to do that. It's not just a staffing capacity issue. I mean, there's a question about like going out to someone's home to question the parent about how they're essentially raising their child when there's no allegation of like actual abuse going on there. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is if it does go to a hearing, what is the process? What does the parent have to produce?
Well, what was that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we may have stopped this hearing process a year ago, probably. But you have history before, the number of hearings per year, the conduct of the hearings. Maybe it wasn't a perfect process, but maybe if this comes back, and it sounds like, there seems to be a case for having to have some type of call it a hearing, call it a review, whatever you want to call it. But if there's an allegation, well, we probably need to do something to look at. So I'm just curious why, if we had a program before that we have experience with, however, minimally it was exercise. What's the difference between then and now, or potentially now?
Yeah, I have another question. Not a question. I want to correct something that you said, that it's important, words are important. So, you mentioned something about a member of the agency going to a home and questioning how a child is being raised. And I just wanted to draw the distinction between being raised and being educated. I think it's an important distinction. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Right, and that is an even more tricky subset of raising, we're not talking about like, physical abuse and neglect. We're talking about how they're choosing to educate their child. I think what we need, if we're gonna go forward with hearings here, I think we need, more guidance on what our authority is, what the process would look like. We have not been successful in hearings in the past. Because there is a parental right to choose how they want to educate their child. And that's pretty broad. That's been our experience in hearings, is that hearing officers defer pretty broadly to parents in terms of defining how they want to educate their children. So right now, it seems cut and dried. You know, we get an email. Okay, then what do? We need some clarity about that. Going into a family's home, FSD has said to us very clearly is an intrusive process. It is potentially a physical harm process for the person from the agency. Are we asking them to present evidence of their assessments, their curriculum? That is one alternative that we could propose here that we've thought about in terms of sort of coming a little bit closer to where we were before, is to actually ask the family to submit evidence of the assessment at the end. That was taken away completely. They have to
Maybe we
attest
need
to
to go
one of.
back to that. Maybe we just need to go back to requiring more paperwork. I mean, if that would solve a lot of this problem, let's do it. I heard you say earlier, it's onerous on families to submit paperwork. Well, sorry, that we're educating kids. It's too bad if it's onerous on the parent. They're making a choice to educate their child. If submitting the paperwork will solve this problem, then let's go back to that and maybe skip the hearing, which seems to be problematic. Anyway, I was gonna call on Senator Hashim while you were gone, because he's had his hand up for a while.
Thank you. So I guess 2 points. I think your point is well taken about the evidence and the clarity. And, you know, I think that if it's applicable, we could talk about what threshold of evidence could be incorporated into this, maybe clear and convincing evidence that I think would provide, you know, some more guidelines for that. But I would disagree that just because there hasn't been a hearing, I don't know when the last hearing was, but it sounds like you haven't seen one since 2019, or
Mhm.
you know, I don't think that just because there hasn't been a hearing doesn't mean that the tool shouldn't exist
Mhm.
in the event that there is substantial evidence that a child isn't being educated, in order to use that tool to make sure they are getting an education. So the point of one of this.
Sure.
Senator Weeks, please.
The hearing officers back in 2019 and previous, were they AOE employees?
No, they are contracted hearing officers. We have a
Contracted
contract.
by AOE?
Contracted by.
They're AOE. I mean, you got control over.
We control the contract. We keep a strong wall between us and the hearing officers so that they are in fact objective. But we had standing contracts with hearing officers that if we needed to, you know, we could assign to a case.
Sorry to get this, but would you mind repeat a little bit of what you had said and let folks go about collecting something? You said collecting some paperwork, maybe we're going to hearing, but really collecting the paperwork sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, well, yeah, if the problem is that,
And I only do it just so I,
we don't really know what's going on because we don't have the evidence. If that's the problem, then let's collect the evidence.
please, that's helpful, thank you.
That's a good point. My recollection is the whole reason why we passed the legislation last year in this regard is that the AOE wasn't making use of those packages. So they wanted to like, okay, we're not reading it, parents don't need to produce it. Hearings is a whole different issue. This is like, there's an allegation. Which I think, you know, we're mandated to at least react to. That's just my first blush on this.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
We did read every document that came through. And there was you know, for some of them, they came through in one read, we were able to sign right off. You know, parents produced minimum course of study that met all the requirements. They produced an end of year assessment that met all the requirements. We reviewed it. It was done. In many cases, we went on for months going back and forth with the parent, trying to, get specific evidence of this or that curricular area. And then afterwards with the assessment, we did allow them to re-enroll until they had produced the full end of year assessment from the prior year. So there was often a period at the beginning of the year the new year where we were still working on trying to get the evidence from the old year. So part of the change, as I understand it, was to get us out of that back and forth with every parent. What I was saying about the assessment is that there are 4 allowed options for end of year assessment. It's not that we've gotten rid of the need to have an end of year assessment. What the legislature did last year was get rid of submitting it to us. So they're still required to have a course of study that meets state requirements, and they're still required to have an end of year assessment. One option that you could try is requiring them to submit evidence of that assessment, whether it's a teacher evaluation, a standardized test, a score, a portfolio, whatever, so that we could document that the family did follow through on their plan. Now, we would not be in a position of evaluating the quality of that child's learning. That is not appropriate. But at least that the parent complied with the requirements that they attested to when they enrolled their child would be the condition for re-enrollment in the subsequent year. So if they did not produce evidence of an assessment, then the natural consequence is you can't re-enroll your child in public school. That is one option. And it won't eliminate the possibility of utter neglect entirely, educational neglect, but it certainly would send a strong signal right up front in the beginning that this is a serious responsibility that you were signing on to here. And when you attest to these things, you are attesting that you are doing the work of your school with your child, and you will be expected to produce something at the end that documents what you did. So we could certainly reinstate that piece of it, and see where that gets us. That's one
So I
possibility.
think we're gonna reinstate something, and I think the committee just needs to decide. Any final questions for Dr. Putnam?
And so final comment,
Yes.
which is, I just want to reiterate that our charge as a committee is not to protect parents from having to do work. I really, really have a problem, a big problem with that. That is not what we're here for. They should be working. And as an AOE, as an agency of education, it is your job to make sure that those kids are getting educated and that those parents are doing what they're supposed to do. I'll just leave it at that.
Dr. Putnam, thank you very much. We know you have to be in the house, so please, and I believe Secretary Boucher has left
Sorry,
for the house. Great conversation, 5 minutes, then we're gonna go through 204 and vote.
Yeah.
Now, right now, we're gonna